Hi there, Jeep owners. Today in your 2018 Jeep Grand Cherokee, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Blue Ox's base plate. There are 5 main components you're going to need when hooking your vehicle to the back of your motorhome. You'll need your base plate, which is the connection point for your tow bar. You'll need your tow bar, which is the connection between your vehicle and your motorhome. You'll need your supplemental connection, which is your safety cables here, which act in addition to your tow bar in the event of a catastrophic failure. You'll need your diode wiring, which takes all the lighting signals from your motorhome and transfers them to the lights at the back of your vehicle, as well as your braking system, which will help the vehicle come to a safe stop when you apply the brakes in your motorhome. And this is what our base plate's going to look like when it's installed. It's really not going to detract from the looks of the vehicle because it's going to be hidden behind the fascia for the most part. There is some minor trimming to allow the components to pass through, but since they're so flush, you almost don't even really notice it. Inside of each end, we'll have a cap that keeps out any dirt, debris, and moisture when not in use. This cap simply just pulls out, and when you are ready to use it, you can take the arms, slide them in, give them a twist until they lock into place. We'll do this on the other side as well. Then over here you can see our safety chain loops where we will attach our safety cables as well. We also received a bracket for our wiring that included with our kit, so we have a place that we can easily attach the wiring setup that you will likely need for your full flat tow setup. We can then hook up our tow bar. The Blue Ox Avail tow bar here will attach directly to our Blue Ox base plate. We're going to remove the pins. We can then take our arm, make sure that it's facing up where it's labeled there. Line it up with our bracket here. We'll then slide our pins through both and then the lock pin on the opposite side. We're going to do the same thing over here on the other side. We'll then need to hook up the rest of our components, your wiring, your breakaway switch, and your safety cables. I've got the safety cables attached to our base plate, but one of the things you want to remember is that you cross your safety cables when hooking them up to your motorhome. So I've got the passenger side of our motorhome here hooked to the driver's side on our Grand Cherokee, and vice versa over on the opposite side. Also hook up our wiring. The only thing left to do now is to place our vehicle into tow mode, and we're ready to hit the road. We'll begin our installation with the hood of the vehicle open and removing 2 clips located here at the top and the front. We'll use our trim panel tool to pop out the center of the clip. Work your blade under the lip to release the top center piece. Wedge it in there and then just pry it up. Once you've got the top piece out, the rest of the clip will simply just pry up after that. We'll then come to the wheel well. We're on the driver's side. You'll have 2 rivets. You'll have one down low and then one up just a little bit higher. And if you look just above those rivets, we'll also have a bolt. We're going to be removing all 3 of these. For the rivets, we're going to use a drill bit about the same size as the center there. And we're going to drill out the center. And that'll let us take out the rivet. We're going to do the same thing with the bottom rivet. And then we'll use our 10mm socket to remove the bolt that's a little up higher. We're then going to do the same thing on the opposite side. We'll now move underneath the vehicle where we need to remove all the push pins located along the bottom here. There's a total of 4. We're going to use our trim panel tool just like we did up top to release the center. And then we can pull out the whole pin. On each side, you're going to have a small twist. This is kind of just in front of where the tire is. We're going to twist that release pin and then just pull it out. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. We'll then want to check behind the panels here underneath your headlight. Depending on the options you have, you may have hardware back there that you need to remove before your fascia will come off. So we're going to use a plastic trim panel tool to get behind the panel and just pop it out. And we can see here that we are connected to a washer sprayer. We're going to pull out and we're going to hold the washer sprayer by the neck there, and then we're just going to gently work off the outer piece. So just pull off the one side, then we're going to pull off the opposite side. And then we can just set this aside. We're going to do the same thing over on the other side. We can now start on one side, and we're going to pull out on our fascia. We're going to use our plastic trim tool as necessary to release any clips that we may have along the way. Once we've got it popped out towards the headlight, we're just going to keep working towards the center, carefully releasing any clips as we go. Once we get to the center here, we're going to swap over to the other side and release it to this point as well. Now that we've got this side worked towards the center, we want to release the top pieces here, pop those up, get those released off. We're supporting the bottom of the fascia the whole time. And then we can gently pull it out and check for any electrical connectors that we need to disconnect behind it. You'll want to make sure that you disconnect anything that you have there. Here's our connector for our fog lights. So we're going to pop off one side and we'll pop off the other there, and it'll just pull out. We're going to do that on the other side as well. And on our passenger side, we're going to have a large connector here we're going to need to disconnect. So you want to make sure you push out on the lock tab, and then you can press in on the release and separate the two. We can now set our fascia aside where it won't get damaged. We're now underneath the hood where we would fill our washer solution right here. There's a pin located next to that we're going to remove. This is just like the ones that we did on the top and bottom where we release the center, and then we can remove the rest of the pin. When I need to get our washer bottle out of the way, we remove the pin up top. So we could do so, but there's still a couple of bolts down here below we need to take out. There's one here, and there's one here in the front. There's also a bolt located just underneath of it. This isn't for the washer bottle, but it's for the fender liner here. And it's not necessary to take it out, but it uses a 10 millimeter just like the other bolts we're going to take out. And it'll free up a lot of room for us being able to work, so we can just push this thing back out of our way. Now we're going to move over to our washer bottle. These are actually going to be 8 millimeter bolts. And now we can gently work our washer bottle down, separating any electrical wires along the way. You'll see that we'll have here, there's a clip that holds our hose. So we're going to use our trim panel tool to pop this clip out. We'll disconnect the electrical connector located here. To release the connector here, you'll want to place a small screwdriver in the slot here and give it kind of a twist. That'll pop up the release tab, so then you can pull it off. There's another electrical connector down here. We're going to do the same thing to that one as well. And we're going to remove the electrical connector down here on the side. That one has a lock tab like before, and then you just press it on the release tab there. We've now got a pan underneath our reservoir, so we can start disconnecting the hoses as it is going to drain. So we're just going to disconnect those. They just pull off of there. Same thing on that side. And this bigger one up here, there's two tabs on each side we're going to have to press in, and then we'll pull out to release that one. At this point, we're just going to let our fluid drain until it's at a low enough level where we can start maneuvering this out of here. If I maneuver it out of here right now, we're going to get washer fluid all over the place. We're now over on the driver's side. You may or may not have a compressor here that you'll need to relocate. We do, so we're going to relocate it. And just like we did on the passenger side, we're going to take out that single bolt using a 10mm socket there to give ourselves a little bit more room by getting this fender liner out of the way. Again, this is not necessary, but just a little more room. Then we're going to remove our compressor bolts here at the front. There's two. We'll use a 13mm socket. And then there is a third bolt that comes in the frame back this way, so you're going to need an extension. And if we come to the back of our compressor here, you'll see there's a nut located up against the frame here on top. It is kind of hard to see. You may need to remove this one by hand if it's a little bit stiffer. So we're just going to crack it loose by hand real quick to make it a little easier. And then we'll zip it off of there. Careful not to lose the nut. Once you've got all three loose, we can slide it back to get it out of the studded holes here. We're just going to slide the compressor back so we can maneuver it out of the way. And we're just going to simply bring it over. And we can actually just take the stud here and we're just going to kind of move it from that hole to this hole just so we can get our hands in there to work. And we're really just going to be moving the stud that was in this hole over to this hole so we've got room to get our hands in there to work. You can even take one of the nuts and just put a couple threads back on it just to ensure that our compressor doesn't fall out of the hole here. Now that our washer bottle is finished draining, we can go ahead and just remove it from the vehicle so it's out of our way. So you're just going to have to work and twist it until it slides out of there. And we'll just set this aside where it won't get damaged. We're not going to prep our hardware. Since our vehicle doesn't have tow hooks, we're going to be using the longest bolts that come in the kit. If your vehicle did have tow hooks, you'll want to refer to your instructions to ensure that you're using the correct hardware, as it does vary depending on your options. But regardless, no matter what you're going to use, all of our hardware from now on is going to have red Loctite applied to it. So we're going to make sure that we put a nice little coat of that onto each of our bolts. Red Loctite doesn't come included with your kit, but you can pick some up at etrailer.com here to ensure that you've got everything you need when you check out so you can do your install at home. We can now take our base plate and put it in position. There are two weld nuts located on the bottom of the frame that we're going to be lining up with these holes. We're going to take the spacers that come in your kit first, though, and slide them into here. The spacers you're going to use is going to be determined based whether you have a tow hook or not. So depending on your options, they may vary. We're using the longest one since we don't have tow hooks. We're then going to take the 80mm bolts, place on a lock washer, followed by a spacer there. And this is going to go up through the bottom of our base plate. This is just going to go right into the weld nut in the bottom of the frame. Once we get this one started, we're then going to come forward and install the other one into the front weld nut. Okay, now that we've got both of those started, we're going to take the longest bolts that come in our kit. Again, this is going to vary since we don't have a tow hook, that's why we're using the longest. Put a lock washer and a flat washer on it. And these are going to slide up through the bottom of our base plate and the spacers, and then up through the hole in our bumper beam. Once you do that, you want to lift up on your base plate, and you want to press it up against the bottom and see if your spacer still moves. If it does still move, you'll want to place washers on it until it doesn't. So we're just going to tip it down. We're going to put one washer on it. We're going to slide it up. Then we're going to push up on our base plate. And I can see here now that our base plate is not touching completely on the bottom. Our spacer is what's taking that up. So that's what we want. And we're just going to place a lock nut on the other side. We're going to basically just repeat that same process here for the other hole by sliding a bolt up through it. We're going to place a washer on it to take up that extra space, and then slide that up through. Once we've got that slid through, now that we know where both of them are, we're going to remove that nut that we had before. We were just kind of holding that in place while we worked. We're going to take our top plate now, slide that over both of our bolts, and then install the nut onto each of those bolts. The inner one does have an access hole here to make it a little easier to get installed. I like to reach in the access hole and just hold the nut on top of the bolt, and then I'll spin the bolt with my other hand to thread it onto the nut. Now that we've got all of our hardware started, we can go back and tighten it all down. We're going to use a 17mm socket for the first bolts that we installed through the bottom. And then we'll use a 15mm socket and wrench for the 2 bolts here at the front. We can now install our side plates. There'll be 2 holes in the side of your base plate. Those are going to line up with the bottom holes here on our side plate. You can see that there's a further distance between the holes in the bottom than there is from the holes in the top. And this is also slanted. And we want that slant to follow our frame there. See how it lines up pretty nice. So we're going to take the 1.5-inch bolts that come in our kit. We're going to place on a lock washer and a flat washer. And then this is going to slide through our plate. And we're going to do the frontmost hole first because it's going to thread into a handle nut that we're going to be feeding in there. So I usually like to take the handle nut, kind of see how long it needs to be, and then bend it appropriately where I can hold it in there and get my hardware started. It is a little bit finicky, holding all of it together, trying to thread it into the nut, but if you take the time to line it all up first, it's usually not too bad. So I've got it started into that nut. We're just going to repeat the same process to get it installed into the second hole right there. We'll then tighten them down with a 15mm socket. And we want to make sure that we're staying flush against the frame and the top here. So what you might find is that it might want to cock a little bit. If it does, you may need to come back and loosen the other hardware that we had tightened down just a little bit to allow this to pull itself flat on the side here. Now that we've got it flat on the side like this though, we're going to use our bracket here as a template and drill out both of these holes using a 3/8 drill bit. Now that we've got both of our holes drilled out, we can run our hardware through. This is going to be the shortest bolts in your kit, the 1.25 inch. We're going to make sure we've got Loctite on those, just like we did with our other bolts. You'll place a lock washer over the bolts. Slide the bolt through the bracket and the frame, and then on the opposite side, we're going to place a lock nut. We're going to do the same thing with the other hole that we have here. And then we'll tighten them down with a 15mm socket and wrench. We can then go back and torque all of our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. Now with all of our hardware torqued down, we can cut off our handle nuts. So what I like to do there is use a pair of side cutters, grab the handle nut there. It's pretty thick, so it's hard to cut. So if you just give some pressure to it and squeeze and just kind of work it back and forth, it'll cut right through it pretty easily. This side's fully installed, so we'll repeat the exact same procedures on the opposite side to get the other side of our base plate installed. Now that we've got the base plate installed on both sides, we can go back and install the supplemental safety cables. These are going to wrap around the frame and connect here to the back side of the base plate. When wrapping this around the frame, you want to make sure you don't pinch any hoses or wiring between the cable and the frame. Working it around the frame just like that. We can then take the quick connect that comes with our kit. We can slide it down. This went through the hole in the bottom of the base plate here at the back. And we're just going to work our cable onto the quick connect. Sometimes it's easier to put one end on the cable first and then run it down through the base plate. Just kind of depends. It's a thick cable, so it's a little hard to work with. And all we really need to accomplish is having both the cables on there and then tightening the connection, closing it off. We can then do the same thing on the other side. There is a lot of excess and slack here, so it's not a bad idea to take a zip tie and just zip tie the excess out of the way to keep it away from the belts or anything like that on the engine. With our cables on, our base plate is fully installed, so now we just need to reinstall all the components we'd removed to get here in reverse order of how we removed them. We'll start with our washer bottle and just work it on up. And then on the other side, you don't want to forget to put your compressor back in place. It just lifts back on the studs and you tighten the nuts back down. Our base plate is on, but you've likely got some more components you're going to be using. You're probably going to be installing a wiring kit for your lights and potentially a braking system as well. And all those things are going to need a bracket at the front for a connector. And this is the bracket that you'll get included with your base plate for mounting your connector for your wiring. This can mount really anywhere you want it. There's no specific location where it's intended to be mounted. It's just a universal bracket. We're going to probably be putting ours behind the fascia here. You can kind of see if I reach around the back side, it has a lip here, and this will make a decent place for us to put this bracket. If we were to just bend it at a 45 here or a 90, so that we've got a right angle, we can use these as our mounting holes and mount it in here. The exact location we're going to be putting it is going to just be determined as we're putting our fascia back on. We're going to be looking for the easiest place to access it and where we have the most amount of room to mount it. And if you are going to be putting a braking system on, you're going to need a breakaway switch. So Blue Ox has included this bracket for your breakaway switch, and it's going to mount around this location. You'll want to measure over about 7 inches. You'll refer to your instructions to find the exact mounting location, and this will just self-tap into the bottom of your bumper beam there and give you a place to attach that breakaway switch. Our customer is not going to be installing a braking system, so we won't be putting this on, but it would just simply self-tap right here. Now, before we put our fascia back on, we're going to go ahead and finish up the rest of our flat toe installation. This is really the best opportunity to do it while you've got the fascia off, because you've got more room to work. Because you've likely got your diode wiring and your braking system that you're going to need to install as well. So let's just go ahead and take that opportunity to do that. Once we've got all that wrapped up, we're going to come back to the fascia. I'll show you how to trim it out and get it back on. Before we put our fascia back on, we are going to have to trim out some of the inside here for our base plate to pass through. So this little section that I've marked out here is going to have to get removed so we can put our fascia up and line it up, because we can't even get it to go back in place at this time because the base plate's hitting against this piece. You can use a pair of snips or a cutoff wheel to cut this out. I'm going to use a cutoff wheel just because this back path here is going to be difficult to cut with snips. This would be pretty easy, but all right, so let's just cut that out. Once you finish cutting it out, you're going to have some rough edges, so you can just take a file or a razor knife to go over those, to knock off those burrs and clean that back up. We'll now set our fascia back into position. We're not going to be reinstalling it just at the moment. We're really just going to be lining up the base plate to see where we need to still trim. So we can see here it's going to be here. When we look through the grill, I do see that we're also going to have to trim additional out behind it just to make it go over a little bit further. So we'll have to add a little bit there. But we can go ahead and mark out where it's at now to see where we're going to need to trim the grill. So after holding it up there, we could see that the base plate was still going to hit, so we're going to extend this all the way over to the edge and finish trimming that out. And we also marked the other side while we were there. So once we get this trimmed out, we can then trim out the other side because we can see where our base plate was going to pass through the grill. And again, we're just going to clean that up with a file. We're also going to prepare our electrical bracket while we're at it. This is where our 6-pole is going to go through. I've got it in the vise with just the slots poking out the top here because we want to bend those at a 90 degree so we can attach it to the fascia. So we're just going to use a hammer to do so. So some of our paint came off, so we're just going to hit that with a file and then just hit it with some black spray paint to cover it back up. Now that we've got it bent, we're going to be putting our bracket here. So we're just going to mark out the holes so we can drill through and then use nut and bolt to attach it. So I know where I want to put it, so we're going to center it on the opposite side. And that way I can more easily drill from these marks. Now that we have got everything marked, we're going to use a 15/16 drill bit to drill out the hole. And we can set our bracket up there and attach it with the included hardware. We are going to be using a couple of the extra washers that come in our kit because this is the hardware for attaching your bracket. But to get a little more meat onto the surface here, there are extra washers that it comes with for that spacer when we were putting the base plate on, so we'll use those. So we're just going to take our bolt, put a washer on it. Actually, we're going to go from the top down just because it'll be easier to get a screwdriver on the attachment. Slide it in like that. Slide that on. After we put the washer on, we'll follow that up with a locking nut. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll tighten them down. We can then tighten them down with a flat-bladed screwdriver and an 11mm wrench or socket. We can now go line it back up on the vehicle again and make sure everything's going to clear, and then we can trim out the mesh part of our grill. So you can see here where I've marked, so I'm going to go ahead and just use my snips to cut out the mesh area here for our base plate to pass through. On this one here I did mark there, but I did find that I needed to take a little bit more off here at the very outside, so we're going to trim that as well. It's that little piece. Next we'll need to trim out for our electrical connector that we put in here. We can see where it's going to be right there. And you got to remember the door is going to have to flip up some, so we have to trim a little bit higher. I didn't mark this, I just marked kind of the general area where my connector is going to be. I can see it, so I'm just going to be cutting out around it. Well, I just want to clean up any of the paint marks that we had made. Some isopropyl alcohol works pretty well, or you could just use some general purpose cleaner. Now that we've got everything trimmed out, we know everything's going to pass through properly, we can go ahead and finish reinstalling our fascia in reverse order of how we removed it. We'll also want to put our washer nozzle covers back in if we have those. You have to reach in, pull it out, and once you've got it pulled out, you can take the cover and just snap it back on over the clips on the sides. And it'll just suck back in, and we're going to repeat that over on the other side. And that completes our installation of Blue Ox's base plate kit on our 2018 Jeep Grand Cherokee.